to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. We jump into the episodes rather than go into detail on our lives and everything else. So you've probably been listening to the last few episodes. We're not doing and chewing the fat for 5 to 10 minutes anymore. We're jumping straight into it. Just a reminder, as this podcast episode goes out, we still have a few tickets remaining for Uprising 2024 at the Old Red Bus Station in Leeds. Head over to uprising.edufuturists.com. Did I get it right way around, Ben? I always usually get it wrong way around. That's why Ben does it, but, well, smashed it. A few tickets still remaining, so head along and grab them before they run out. Our public vote is now closed, as is our judges, and we are excited to announce the winners on the 11th of July in Leeds. So before further ado then, let's get in with a good friend of the podcast, somebody that we were saying we had on quite recently. Looking back, time flies when you're having fun. And it was actually about 15 months ago that we had Don on. And that doesn't scream too long ago in the world than anything else. But in what we're going to discuss today is, again, AI and education. Normally education moves pretty slowly, but AI is moving it pretty quickly. So, Don, how are you doing?
I'm very well, yes. I'm down here in sunny Brighton, but my spirit's in the north. I'm a man from beyond the wall, as they said in Game of Thrones. So it's nice to be speaking to people not necessarily speaking the world I live in.
We do love people from the south, but you're right. There is something that, and to be fair, when Dan used to be on the podcast, he used to say that me and Steve were Midlanders because he was from Newcastle. Well, to be fair, he's a Midlander if we're talking about having guests on from Scotland.
Well, it's a different spirit. I was with some friends who did the Brighton, the two Scots guys who did the London to Brighton bike ride and came, we had a meal. And I remember now how the different dynamic, we were in the pub, we were twice as loud as everybody, like more laughs. It's a different culture, but it's all good.
Yeah, so last time we came on, we stepped into whether we think AI was going to be a mainstay in education. Do we think it was a bit of a bubble? And you obviously shared your journey over decades prior, not just on AI, but education technology, trends, and also learning experiences. So it was great. And I think I remember you were saying it's not, I think it's going to evolve and it's going to iterate and it's going to accelerate at times. And here we are, 15 months post that time, and it's definitely not going away. We discussed briefly, didn't before we joined, that it's only accelerating and it's iterating, and I think it's constantly pushing the boundaries of teaching and learning and education as a whole. So do you want to kind of step into maybe the last 12 months or even back to the last 3 months, Donna, in terms of some of the stuff that you're seeing that are moving things forward in regards to this space?
Well, I think that's right, Steve. This has gone steadily up in a sort of linear progression and has continued to be exponential in terms of what hits us as potential users of AI. Unlike most technologies in the past, which either wobbles or plateau off and so on. And I suppose I've never really seen anything like this in my lifetime in terms of technology, because of its steady progress, the constant surprises you get ahead of expected time. So suddenly it produces video. Who saw that coming? Suddenly it produces actually real-time dialogue with hardly any latency in using voice. Who saw that coming so quickly? So I think this is, if anything, it has exceeded my expectations. I'm neither an optimist nor a pessimist. I like to think of myself as a realist in terms of technology, because I've had to build businesses in this area, and you have to be a realist or you'll die by over or underestimating. But I think there have been a series of events that no doubt we'll discuss in relation to both teaching and learning, because they're two different things, which make this technology unique. But there's one thing that underlies this, which I think really has hit home to me, is the very profound nature of this technology as a shared resource for humanity, as it were. That's what makes this unique. We've scraped all this stuff together, the entire sum total of human cultures, plural, in many, many languages. And sure, it's got a skew towards English, but, early attempts are like that. But we're heading towards this deep well of the sum total of human knowledge in many languages, many cultures, which is becoming a bit of a shared resource. This is unique in the history of the species. And it almost goes back to a time when we didn't have writing, or we had an oral culture where there was no separation of this stuff out there, the difference between the knower and what is known in writing, by and large, other media as well. Because that then started to be owned by people. It got owned by institutions. They start using writing against you, in a sense. You have laws telling you what to do. You have political entities telling you what to do. I think I'm getting really much more optimistic about this technology because I see this deep well of shared stuff as being a thoroughly good thing. Somebody made a very interesting point on X this week, which is it's a bit like the US Marshall Plan. And I hadn't thought of it that way. All this technology has come from the US. We will have to really accept that fact, or China. It's a two-horse race. But the US is winning. All the innovation really came from the US. China are just copying it. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't care where it comes from, as long as it does us all. If it ends up as a shared commons good. And I think it's heading that way. With the open source models even from American companies like Meta, who thought that Zuckerberg would be a hero, there it goes. So I've been very pleased with progress, and no doubt we'll talk about some of the little landmarks since we last spoke, because I think they're already having an impact on how people use the technology.
Just before we get into looking at some of those landmarks, I'm intrigued based on that thing that you were talking there about oral cultures. I read something that you wrote a few months ago, and I know you've done a few podcasts recently around orality and literacy and those two things, how they work, and reflecting back on Walter Ong's work in that space. And I wonder if you could maybe talk at that, because I'm one of those people who feels like I've been saying for a while that the assessed piece that we've always done in education, which has been an essay or has been a written exam piece,
exactly,
is never really been the only way we should assess. And we've been talking about this idea in some contexts around this viva voce type model that you should really be able to justify orally why you've chosen what you've done and be able to critique that. And how do we do that on scale and the stuff that goes with it? But I know that there's been a lot of work there that you've been researching, but also talking about. So I wonder if you could talk at that before we get into some specific things.
Yeah, as AI swung towards multimodality, and that's the inclusion, of course, audio and real dialogue, which is what we're doing here right now. I mean, wouldn't it be bizarre if you didn't do podcasts, you just did some sort of text chat and published it? It would be like completely different medium. It would be ridiculous and almost bizarre. But there's a fundamental point to be made here, which I've believed for a long time. I wrote a book on learning technologies and wrote about this quite a bit. The education in particular has been drowning in a sea of text. So I sent my two boys off to school at 5. They come back, in their 20s. One didn't go to university, one did. And then a reflection, now kids now do a master's degree, you pay another 10 grand for, to write another essay, basically, or you buy it from China for about $200. And what did he do during that process? By and large, you're absolutely right, Ben. The massive focus was on reading and writing text in every subject. And yet you step out into the real world, and that's not the real world. Some people have jobs where they never encounter text. In fact, most, my relatives who are plumbers and plasters and stuff, they don't come across text while they're doing the job very much. All the people in the real world actually don't do that. Even when you work within a business, you find that text is far less important than you might imagine. If you get too obsessed by it, you missed all the human stuff. Which is what marketing and sales and all that is really about, and also the delivery and design of products. So I think especially higher education has become so obsessed by text, it's become almost self-delusional around the point you made, which is not only what you teach and what people learn, if learning is a sort of relatively permanent change in long-term memory, but also how you're assessed. You assess almost nothing by text, except the ability to interpret text or write text. And the example I often quote here is when kids go through a humanities degree, as I did a degree in philosophy, you end up doing your final exams and you write these essays using a pen. And you start top left and finish bottom right. Now, nobody ever writes I've written 5 books. I've been blogging for decades, since it started, about 15, 17 years or something. Nobody ever starts top left and finishes bottom right with a beautiful piece of critical thinking based text. You change it, you swap sentences, you change words. It's all to do with, that sort of thing. So getting somebody to write a piece of text in an essay, and of course, what do students do? They've been doing it for centuries. They memorize essays. So what are you testing? You're testing their ability to remember a piece of long-form text. When kids go into those exam halls, they're guessing what the questions are going to be. They take a bit of a gamble on 5 out of 8 topics, and they get it canned. So I think people in higher education don't know actually much about learning because they don't get any training on it. And unlike secondary school teachers, whom I greatly admire, because they're at the hard coalface of having those kids right in front of them, and they have to get this right. They have to get it right. University people don't. Yeah, if you fail your exams, you don't go down with the plane like the pilot, And so I think there's a certain laziness around setting essays. And then lecturing is really easy. The distinction, I think, is lecturing is really easy. Teaching is very hard. And there's a huge gulf between those two. And of course, essay setting is really easy. And it really is. It's one-liner, like 3,000 words next Friday, Actually assessing people is really tricky. And I think we're seeing this. I'm glad that I'm seeing the death of the essay. Nobody really writes essays in real life, I think as we shift assessment into the assessment of a wider, deeper set of skills using these multimodality tools, I think it will be a massive improvement in what we've got.
And I think that's probably what I've seen often, most recent. I think the biggest fear and the biggest thing in education when AI, when I say it came onto the scene, when large language models and the AI that we're talking about in this context per se really hit home and started to develop over a 6-month period. Let's call it November 2022 to potentially the first year.
Yeah.
There was this panic of
exams,
and I remember a good friend of ours on the podcast, somebody who used to be us, Dan Fitzpatrick, going on to onto TV, having a conversation and an honest debate with somebody who was saying the only way that we can support this is to go back to handwritten exams for everything. And I'm thinking, so that was like one of those things. And people going onto it going, yeah, correct, we need to make sure, we need to control this. It's bad, there's cheating, there's plagiarism, all these kind of conversations going on. Yeah. This real negative context and slant on AI. And what I've seen now is an evolution of adoption, embracing, and excitement, where it's going, oh, this could change things. And Ben, I know that you've been in this space for a long, through its journey in terms of your ideas guy stuff as well, where, correct me if I'm wrong, where it's ultimately, how can we, just looking at tools, and now they're going, how can we actually change assessment when we probably should have changed them previously?
Correct.
We're now being asked to change them for better. And I think AI is shuffling that deck and pushing it more prominently, going, well, you've always done it this way, but now you can't, because this is going to prohibit the ability to really see whether it's truth or not. And I think there's that excitement of going, oh, well, look what we can actually do with it. Yeah, if we change this, the core principle of the something that we've been talking about on the Edufuturists is, if we change the endpoint assessment away from handwritten exams or just literally writing essays, what does learning then become? Because we're making it about the learning, not just the endpoint assessment. And I think that's my excitement of AI now. I think it's a real opportunity that's making people change because they've been forced to in some context because they couldn't stay where they were. Maybe if you guys want to come into that.
Yeah, I think it surfaced something. I think we almost had to go through this because it surfaced a very interesting issue here, which is how tied and obsessed education at all levels is to credentialism, how that's become the big deal. The bit of paper that you get at the end. And of course, we all know that we forget most of what we learn anyway, and so on and so forth. It's not that important. If you run a company, I barely looked at people's qualifications when I was hiring them, and that was way back in the day. I think what's happened here is it's shone the spotlight on the inadequacy of current assessment systems. And that's nobody's fault. It just, we now see it for what it is. Rather primitive, ridiculously obsessed by text, almost obsessively. And actually this happened before this, because I don't know if you remember before AI, but the big tech thing at all the conferences I used to go was blockchain. I used to really, I was absolutely astonished at these I think I know what that technology is. I couldn't believe how much money was being poured into that. And all it was locking down credentials. I can't tell you how many people in universities got big grants to lock down credentials to make sure nobody cheated. It was this turning everything into this toxic game between those who teach and those who learn. It's like Tom and Jerry, and if they do it wrong, we're going to catch them. And one word that really sums all this up, because I laugh now when I hear it, is academic integrity. It's such a conceit, that word, like lighten up, guys, like integrity. So I was in Norway recently, and they were telling me that their Minister of Education was sacked because most of her thesis had been plagiarized. We had the similar thing, and somebody actually knew of in Africa, Minister of Education, with the president of Harvard sacked plagiarism. People have got to be very careful with what they wish for here. If we shine this light on every academic, ask an academic, would you like all of your teaching materials, everything you've ever written, would you like that? If I put it through Turnitin, would you enjoy that experience? I think they'd be shaking with fear, because it's a sort of fuzzy line, really. And, between plagiarism and the sort of cutting and pasting and changing a couple of words in a sentence, but, it doesn't really matter that much because you know the point. So I think we're playing with fire here, and I think I would much rather move on to something new and try and look at the improvement of it. So many people are determined to protect what is bad rather than move on and examine what could be better. And I think that's a shame. But I think we almost, to be fair, we had to go through it. It was one of those things, that we had to have a ruckus. And we'll all be shaking hands and go on to something better.
Absolutely. And it is this. We had a conversation recently with somebody who, and we've been the people that have been banging a drum for revolution on the shoulders of people like yourself and Bob and David Price and Valerie Hannon, all the wonderful people that have gone before that are still saying we need to do something different in education, and not always like a disruptive revolution, but we've been saying something needs to change. And then their statement was around that we need a little bit more evolution, which was fine. But interestingly, I think what we're saying now is that the revolution has already happened in the fact that it's become so mainstream, in the sense that the fact of 100 million users in less than 100 days on ChatGPT meant that we were at a point where this is not a small fry thing that a few weird computer scientists are talking about. This is like front and center. And I know you've posted around this, and we've talked about it a little bit previously, when with Apple have been obviously super quiet in this space up until a few weeks ago, launching Apple Intelligence. And their tagline, this is the bit that really grabs me, their tagline is AI for the rest of us. And I keep thinking, hold on a minute, like this is, forget about what people's thoughts around Apple as a company and the money they make and all the stuff that goes with it and the things that are wrong about it. But to market it as AI for the rest of us, it means that it is front and center in our world. It's going to be in however many billion devices as a norm, without us being able to do anything about that. So I think that's the maybe I know you've got some thoughts on that space. So
I do,
I'd love to hear that.
Well, it's a good this is a good thing to discuss. One, I think I like data on this front. So, how many users are using this thing? And there are two big reports, one from Microsoft and one from Deloitte, that these are massive surveys, tens of thousands of people, loads of data points from things like Copilot, something like 1 trillion data points on the Microsoft report, tons of interviews all around the world, 200 countries. And it's quite clear that the usage of those generative AI tools within the workplace, and that was the Microsoft report and the Deloitte's one, is just rising like a rising tide that will never ebb. You're up to 70% of people using this stuff in the workplace. And it's not because the work is giving them this thing, they're just using it because they find it incredibly useful. And I think that's the driver here. And the same is true in education with learners. This has been driven by learners, not teachers, in a funny sort of way. It's been driven by students, not faculty. Now, the Apple thing was interesting because I think this was the expected boost. Apple studiously ignored the two words artificial intelligence for marketing reasons. They wanted not to be part of the mob. Nevertheless, they launched what they called personal intelligence, or Apple intelligence, and the tagline was personal intelligence. And this is about appealing to the consumer, the sort of typical iPhone user who likes that integrated view of their photographs, their bits of video, and all their email and stuff in one place, linked to their MacBook or whatever. So a lot of the features they launched, first of all, I think there was something went under the radar here, which was their attention to privacy. They understood that a lot of people are a wee bit worried about this privacy thing. In other words, this AI stuff's, how does it handle my data? Is it using this data to train future models? Are they ripping me off? What happens when I type something in? Where does that go? They just, the personal cloud computing model they've put forward looks pretty good, and they've opened it up to scrutiny by experts in cybersecurity. So later in the year, I think that's quite good. But a really important thing was the shift to your device. So they have the M3 chip, and they have all this local AI processing on chips themselves, the chipset. And that move towards the edge computing or the devices is really important. So they've tried to solve the data privacy thing. You'll see Siri just go through the roof. It will be as good as, the other voice chatbots we've seen. Boy, was that a long time coming, but that they needed to do that. And then they made a little bit of announcement about agentic stuff, and that's these agents. Let's not go into too much detail there. It gets quite technical very quickly. But that notion that on your phone, you've got all these photographs of your relatives, your friends, and that, and you can just search for one, and you can do all these wonderful things with the photographs and so on. Apple, as usual, focused on the user experience and personal consumer needs. Now this tide I talk, it's like water, a rising sort of, it's seeping into schools, into universities, into the workplace, into your home. Apple have just widened that into the whole consumer market. Remember, Microsoft's primarily still a corporate company, dabbles in games, corporate. OpenAI are looking underneath them all now, providing the foundation models. And then other companies are, Facebook and Google make their money from advertising. So they have a different thing entirely as well. So I think, and all these companies are 2.x or $3 trillion market caps. I mean, it's astonishing, those figures. But the biggest, largest, and the most important companies, but also by market capitalization, NVIDIA, who had heard of them even 3 years ago, have a market capitalization of over 3 trillion, higher than Microsoft and Apple. Well, sorry, but higher than Apple, not Microsoft. I think Microsoft's now 3.x trillion. So the evidence, the data from usage, from the companies that are involved, they're all AI companies now, from actual users benefiting from this, is just phenomenal. It's a rising tide that will not go out.
Yeah. And it very much is, isn't it? Yeah. Sorry, Steve. Yeah,
it's one of those things that Apple have gone really strong.
Yeah.
Ever since they brought out the Apple Mac, or even probably before that, when Joe Jobs stood up on stage and back there, their marketing game is unbelievable.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to see what the product actually is, and I'm an iPhone user. Potentially was going to move away. I'm probably going to have to move away anyway. The bit that annoys me is the marketing tagline of AI for everyone, or for everyone else, or whatever Ben said it was. I can't remember it. Terrible. But then released actually what device it's only going to be on. So it's only going to be on basically the newest device and onwards.
Yeah.
So I've been a tight Yorkshireman for a long period of time, as Ben knows, and spent no money. And I've not bought the latest iPhone or latest device. So it'll shift. So, but I think they played a real strong game in regards to marketing to the consumer.
Yeah.
And marketing well in regards to what it will be about, like you say, without that play of AI.
Yeah.
We've seen the big heavyweights come in and Musk and everybody else say, well, if it's on devices, we're never going to use those again, and blah 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 because of the privacy. And I'm like, is it privacy, or is it because you're pushing a different agenda and a different AI product yourself? Point. Is it that battle of egos at the top? But I'm really excited, and I think it was only maybe 3 months ago. I was just having a dinner with some friends, and they said, we're really surprised that in all of this sphere, Apple haven't come to the table.
Yeah.
And I said, I am surprised as well. I said, but with these big tech companies, often we don't see the months and the years development that have gone into this stuff because they're so tight and they want to get the message, because they only get one opportunity to get it out there and get it out right. So if that gets leaked, and I just didn't see it coming. I'll be honest. I was like, and I work in the tech space, and I was like, wow, they've come to it. Welcome to the party, and I'm excited. That doesn't mean they haven't been having a party behind the scenes. That just means they haven't publicly announced it. But yeah, I think it will be a world, I think, taking it back to learning, but even just to consumer as well. So all the different business to business, education, and consumer. I think nobody has a Microsoft phone, but everybody will have chat, Copilot, the Apple alternative, Gemini. Everybody will have and be utilising it, not just on a browser, in everyday life, like we have done for the smart replying Gmail and the interactive conversational devices that we have now, where this will really bring it to the forefront. And I think that will take it onto the next level in education, because all of those people and those parents that might not have used it, and those other stakeholders, such as governors, that might have an iPhone or use a Mac or something else, they'll then go, I now use it and I now understand it and I've played with it a little bit more, where they were nervous when it was a startup, or if you're a Microsoft, they might not have used a Google alternative. So I'm really like to see that it's going to be taking it forward, because as Bob and many people talk about, there's more stakeholders involved in education than just teachers and learners and those leaders leading it. I think that's where I'm excited to see it go.
And one of the stakeholders is parents, of course, because, and that's actually maybe a nice point to also point out. So I have a Google Pixel, which is an early iPhone, half the price of an iPhone and so on. So I think there'll be more than one player in this market, which is always good for everybody, to be honest, because it puts pressure on everybody, makes it better for us. But around just before this, of course, we had some amazing, I was in Norway giving a talk to 1,200 teachers there, and I focused very much on, just before the Apple launch, on the other launches, because we had OpenAI coming on, very interestingly, featuring 2 teaching examples in the launch of ChatGPT 4o, O for Omni. I thought that was fascinating. They didn't feature any corporate applications, 2 hardcore maths examples. And that shows me, I've always said, I agree with Bill Gates that the 2 big winners here will be education and health. On education, though, when they showed, and if you watched the live demo, the first thing that came up was them solving a little linear equation, the 3x plus 1 equals 4 type thing, very simple thing that most people would probably remember. You teach it very early, for first year secondary or some primitive algebra, take 1 off both sides, you've got 3x equals 3, x equals 1. But they talked through this with real dialogue. But what was interesting, if you listen carefully, was you as a parent could have prompted this thing. My parents didn't know any mathematics. They were working people, never gone to university. And when I had a maths problem, I got stuck. This is pre-internet. That was me, stuck. Now you have these things on tap, this intelligence on tap, which will help you get over a problem you have. And this is, I think, how this technology is currently being used by learners, workers, whatever, or even in real life, going traveling, or what are the 5 things I want to do in that city if I'm going there next week. Now, I thought it was interesting. The second example was much more sophisticated maths. Maths is I've taught maths. Maths is a really difficult subject to teach and really difficult to learn as well. It's so abstract, so difficult, which is why most people fail. To be honest, it begs a bigger question for me, which I put to the teachers there, some of whom agreed, say, should we really be teaching so much maths to people if this technology just has it sussed? It's a bit like a calculator moment when the calculator was launched, 70s and 80s, I can remember it. Maths teachers, the establishment as a whole, decried the arrival of the calculator, thought it would result in people becoming incredibly stupid. Yeah, recognize that line? Which has become a big meme, is AI making us stupid? Actually, what happened was we now have graphic calculators in secondary schools. They're doing things now that first and second year undergraduates used to do at college because they've got incredible sophistication on the calculators. So we moved from slide rules to calculators and so on and so forth. So it meant that people could go up the value chain faster for those who were good at maths. The big problem is those who are not very good at this stuff. And then you had the Salman Khan thing coming on with Sun and doing, again, a little bit of simple geometry that moved on to trigonometry. And these are, they look simple, these examples, but if you've ever tried to teach, young boys who don't really want to learn this stuff, you'll know what a wondrous thing this can be. Then it coincided with something that's people put down to COVID. I'm not so sure it's just that. I think it's multifactorial. Is kids not going back to school and parents doing it, the rise in homeschooling, which is not just a UK thing. It's also much bigger in the US. But supposing we get to a position where these tools really have these teaching abilities, then it pushes parents into having a choice. Well, a certain type of parent, to be honest, middle-class parents who are more self-sufficient on that front. I mean, you have to have the kit and so on. There are all sorts of digital divide issues here. Nevertheless, I think this technology is starting to emerge in such a way that, some of the things that you did absolutely need teachers for, and still do, by and large, you may be able to use the technology for. And I think parents will get that sussed. I can actually teach my kids any subject, because it's not just maths. This thing is knowledgeable in 100 languages in any subject you want to teach, any subject. That's why I focused on the concept of the universal teacher. It's almost silly to imagine that you'll have a maths teacher or a science teacher, because this will just be a teacher of anything in any language, full of accessibility features.
And I think that's, totally with you. And we'll probably skip back to some of the advances that we've seen, because that might be a nice thing to talk about. But whilst we were there, I think the conversation really is this $1 million, $1 trillion question, really, which is about teachers. And every time I do a presentation, I feel like, am I being a bit disingenuous? So I go in and I say things like, and I get it, technology won't replace teachers. But teachers who use technology are likely to replace those that don't. Nicked it from Mr. Hope, who probably nicked it from a million other people as well. But I actually use that all the time. And then I'm sometimes thinking to myself, actually, if we're really honest, and we take this to its furthest extreme, will this technology replace teachers? And I suppose the question that we kind of are asking now is the concept of teaching. Well, certainly I know you've intimated already about like lecturing being an easier skill than teaching, and I would definitely agree in that space. But is that role of and don't all shoot me, teachers. Like I'm just asking a question. I'm not saying I believe this.
Exactly.
Don't all come at me when me and me say this. But is teaching as a skill or as a profession becoming obsolete? And I know that's $1 million question. It's probably not it's nuanced, but is teaching becoming obsolete? I suppose is where we're looking at.
Yeah, so this is a big question now. And you're absolutely right. It's a question that we need to ask now, because we have just in the last few months seen real examples. So teaching is a funny word, though. You've got to really... I always start with the premise, which is teaching is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. And the means is always the cognitive improvement of a learner. So the idea that teaching... sometimes when I hear people speaking about teaching, I think they think that teaching is an end in itself. But teaching makes no sense if there is no learner. So it's always a means to an end. So if you see it as a means to an end, there could be different means to that end. And if one of those means is technology, then why wouldn't we choose it? Because it's scalable. It can perhaps have more accessibility in many, many more languages, be more efficacious. And then why wouldn't we choose that? Because it would be to the benefit of society as a whole to have education being quicker, cheaper, and more efficacious. So that's my starting premise here, that teaching is a means to an end. And it's a hard question to ask this, because people are very emotionally attached to the profession and what they do for a living and so on. Nevertheless, I think we have to ask this hard question, what is teaching? And of course, the danger is that you just focus on this notion, the mechanics of teaching, which is the actual hardcore, if you have, what do we mean by learning even? Let's ask that question. So if like me, you think learning is making a sort of relatively permanent change in long-term memory in learners, they have to walk away with something they retain after the teaching event and can use at some further point in their life in an autonomous fashion. Now, we have seen how things have moved on very, very quickly here, so that you have audio. This audio is really important here. Nobody goes into a classroom and just does text. And the mute teacher would be a rather odd thing. Just showing multiple choice questions on text and getting people to put their hand up, nobody speaking, that would be bizarre. Dialogue is fundamental to teaching. Fundamental. because by and large, you're interacting in that way, either with a whole class or with an individual or a group. And that's true of teaching as a whole. But that core teaching, the exposition, the getting the cognitive change in people, that's the bit that's most vulnerable here, because the technology is available 24/7, which no human teacher is. We sleep 8 hours a day and we need time off and holidays. It can speak literally dozens and dozens of languages. No teacher on the planet can do that. It can be sensitive to accessibility issues. Not only, and people forget that, if you've got hearing or sight impairment, AI solved that problem by and large by having text to speech and speech to text a long time ago. So for those people, AI is an absolute savior in terms of learning and their lives in general. They're if you're blind or deaf, then your smartphone becomes the remote control for your life. It's that important. But we're also talking about people with dyslexia, dyspraxia, and autism, ADHD. I mean, the accessibility features in this newer technology, it can be sensitive to them all. Teachers find this very hard, which is why we have specialists around SEN. But I think this technology is becoming very, very accessible in multiple ways because you can personalize it to that individual learner. So the exposition, the core, the sun at the heart of our teaching solar system, I think that's likely to be replaced first. This is a good thing because it actually takes pressure off teachers a little bit. And let's suppose we automate marking. Like, who wouldn't want that? Who wouldn't want that? Who wants to spend their weekends marking, whether it's faculty and universities doing essays? Some people might say it's still a good thing because you get to know your students. Nevertheless, I think the core, the heart of the solar system, the sun, if we get AI to do that exposition and it does it better and it's available and it has audio and it has all those things, motivating features, it's recognizing even the emotion in the child's voice and so on. We saw glimpses with the OpenAI launch that was happening already. Multimodal teaching, in other words, which is what real teachers do in the real world using the desktop. A second thing happened, which was the launch from Google on Project Astra, which went under the radar. Because there you just show your smartphone around the room and it knows what it's seeing. It just pointed it towards, the first thing was a speaker. It said, oh, yeah, what's that? Oh, that's the tweeter. That's for higher frequency sound. It actually knows the context. And context matters in teaching, not so much in schools because you're in one context, namely a classroom or in a lecture theatre in higher education, but teaching in the workplace, which is where most people learn. Remember, you're only in school for a certain amount of time, then even shorter time in higher education. You're going to spend most of your life in work. There, once you identify the context in which someone's in, what application are they using on their desktop? What problem are they trying to solve? What's gone wrong here? How can we help them? All that performance support. I think that you can see this is already happening. I can give you some examples of that. But there, understanding the context, they even showed the smartphone, just pointed it towards the laptop that some kid was on, and it knew what the code was on the screen. It was an encryption and decryption algorithm, and it knew what the code was. In other words, it was like a super teacher that knew exactly what the learner is writing, doing, seeing, thinking about, almost as well as what they're doing as a task, whether it's on their laptop, on their smartphone. It's got intelligence about context. That's why privacy is so important still. So a number of advances were made, not assaults on teaching, but we can see ways in which it just takes, the big political issue certainly in the UK is teacher workload. That's a political issue now, around recruitment especially. So embracing this first wave of AI, I'm just shocked that the teaching professional isn't going, well, let's bring it on because this is what we've been waiting for. But of course, like assessment, they're a bit fearful because, well, this is a slippery slope. Everyone has that feeling. I think you expressed it very well there in your preamble to my response. But how far can you go with this thing? So once you've got the core teaching done, because it's just incredibly sensitive to what the learner is doing on an individual basis, how much of this other stuff like well-being and so on can it tackle? And in my talk in Norway, I really pushed that hypothesis out. So take something at the other end of the spectrum where you say, well, yeah, surely isn't going to help us with any maybe psychological problems a learner may have at school and university. Well, so we have, I quoted, I live in Brighton and nearby is Beachy Head, and there's a number of years ago I came across a little plaque which had been a poem written, not a poem, it was a sort of rhyming thing from parents whose young daughter, 16-year-old daughter, had jumped off the cliff because she had got poor exam results. I'll tell you, it was an absolute epiphany for me. I can still feel the emotion I felt then when I saw this, that a young girl would be so upset but brave enough to do that on the back of an exam score. And since then, I've been really skeptical about this, examining the hell out of people, especially on things like maths and so on, that probably you'll never use again for the rest of your life, except in a few cases. But in those cases, you've got things like psychologists, very famous thing in character AI, 3.2 million people, young people, hitting that every month. 3.2 million. I mean, no teacher gets any. Teachers, by and large, deal with several thousand pupils in a lifetime of teaching, whether it's university or schools. And this thing's at 3.2 million. Then Replica, there was a really good study from Stanford on this, looking at a big data set on another site, Wellbeing site called Replica, where they had uncovered evidence from real people who had been, on the mental health side, away at the suicidal end, where they had absolutely acknowledged that this thing had stopped them not only in having suicidal thoughts, it was sort of standard CBT therapy these things are delivering, but also from committing suicide. Now, that would be astonishing if the technology prevents that, because young people do not go to their teacher, their parents. They don't go to adults. They suffer in silence. What was it like to be 16? You suffer in silence when you're being bullied. You tend not to go and open up to people. And I think even then, at that use case, at the far end of the spectrum, I'm seeing evidence that this may be of really powerful use. So what about all the stuff in the middle? We could start going through the skittles, but for the first time on the horizon, we're nowhere near this yet. Schools are not, teachers are not disappearing anytime soon, because there's this huge blanket of things in this solar system as you come away from the sun of pure exposition and teaching out into, the motivation of young people, socialization and so on, that teachers are incredibly good at and is still valuable. But will those skittles be knocked off one by one as we go forward? I suspect so.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting thing, because regardless, if you look at teaching, and I think it was UNESCO, wasn't it, that did the study that said within the next 6 years we'll have a void of 44 million teachers because of a recruitment shortage and a retention shortage.
Correct.
It's a really interesting thing to then think, brilliant, let's not get rid of teachers, but there isn't enough of them.
Correct.
And if you start now, if we said right now we're going to, as we've talked about, we're in a political game at the minute in England specifically, in the UK, where we're saying education, we're going to fix it right now. Okay, but even if right now we said, right, there's a gap of so million in England or across the UK, to fix that right now, you'd have to retrain those individuals or start them through the university, unless you're going to create some kind of different shorter qualification for teachers, which is not always and often worked, rightly or wrongly.
Correct.
So I liken it to a project that I was a little bit involved in a couple of years ago in regards to artificial intelligence using for radiography.
Mm-hmm.
So for radiographers, there was a shortage of radiographers in the UK for the NHS. And through that, what happened was, it's going to take us 5 years, even if we've now seen the shortage. We should have seen it earlier, but we've now seen it. It's going to take us 5 years to get to a point. By then, people will have retired, so actually the number's always going to change. But to get back to that point, so how can we get over that? And through that project, they were using artificial intelligence to identify X-rays.
Yeah.
To not say we're going to get rid of radiographers.
Yeah.
But we've got some really skilled people, but we don't have enough of them, like teachers. Some people that are absolutely fantastic in regards to coaching and supporting and facilitating learning.
Yeah.
Brilliant. But what about all other stuff? And the key bit is they don't have enough time to look at these X-rays in the radiographer terms. So let's get artificial intelligence to do it. It's demonstrating the accuracy over a period of time. Yeah. And there might just be one final check if you want a human element. Correct. And you would still have that. But it's then actually giving those teachers, breaking it down and giving 40% time back to do something else, which is coaching and transforming and really mentoring those young people to learn and be passionate about learning. I was speaking to a teacher on Friday, and they were saying, I had a real passion for Shakespeare when I was in school. I ended up teaching it, and I said, "Oh, that sounded a bit outdated." She went, "No, I absolutely love Shakespeare. It was my real passion." So I loved engaging it, and I was like, "Let's think about the teachers and all of the tasks. If we were to write down the toilet roll of information of all of the information that teachers and the tasks that they have to do, and if we then narrowed that down to really just being classroom and the focus on supporting learners and got rid of all the other stuff that
Correct.
AI can actually do right now and definitely will be able to do in the future, well, actually, do we have a shortage of 44 million teachers? Or are we giving away some of the stuff that actually some of the teachers aren't so good at, don't want to do, so
Yeah.
they can spend more time actually supporting young people?
Yeah.
And if that's interacting and just giving knowledge ready to pass an exam, give it to somebody else because you don't want to do it anyway. And if that's what we still do in exams, we're in bad straits. But also that thing of chats and all these different spaces. I think that's where AI will really, really start to take its place in the next 10 years and beyond, where we will no longer talk about a teaching gap because teaching hopefully will be focused on the right things, and the technology such as AI will really start to support and transform the rest of it that it should have been allowed to do for a long period of time. We've been focused on the wrong things and been just constantly giving things into the saddlebags of teachers and overworking them and overburdening them.
Yeah.
You mentioned burnout and workload.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it's from transactional stuff that really shouldn't be in a teacher's bag anyway.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think I was in Africa twice in the last year, in Senegal and South Africa. And the UNESCO figure for it is not like Europe. It's the vast bulk of the shortages are people who get hardly any teaching at all. I mean, I was in a school with no roof, like hardly any chairs, people sitting on the floor. So I think we have to recognize that, if we think that supplying warm bodies is going to be a solution in very, very poor countries where they don't have enough money to even pay teachers and where it's so low they don't turn up, then think again. It's a supply and demand problem here. But I think this, going back to the sort of knocking off of the Skittles thing, let's stay within our context for a minute. It's very interesting. All my life, I really hate that moment when you get these kids on TV who have got their 3 A's, and their A levels, because I came from a world where that happened to hardly anybody. And I think I wince when I see it, because I know what it felt like to be in a school where only 3 people went to university. I was lucky I was one of them. But what did it feel like for all the other people, And that's why people like myself and Bob and so on have fought this battle all their lives. Because that anecdote I hear a lot, always wary of it. Oh, I was my inspiring teacher. That's the winners. The winners always, that's always the graduate middle class people. I know a lot of people who, I am one of those people. I can barely remember the names. I had dozens of teachers, moved through several schools. I can't actually remember many of them, but I didn't have that. But people who lose, the 50% who don't go to university, ask them that question, which I have. And their experiences of school couldn't wait to get out. It was horrible, because they were the losers. The victors always write the history. And the trick there is to give those people a chance by freeing up teachers' time. You're absolutely right. And it's a really interesting thing. I've been involved in a lot of AI. So I like doing real things. I give these talks at conferences and stuff, but that's not like who cares sort of thing. Actually doing things in the real world, really, that's what I've spent my whole life doing. And I had a really interesting project, and I'm just back from the Netherlands. We did this project, these young people, it was a really tight team, 3 of them in the end. And she came on and gave a presentation about the project. And their lesson was, it wasn't that we had 70, 80% increase in efficacy and time saved. In other words, this was a really hard task, and overnight it was transformed by AI into something much quicker, much better. She said what was great is we had time to then concentrate on quality. They were so busy meeting a deadline, trying to get this stuff done, that they had just run out of steam, like any teacher, Like you're exhausted at the end of every week because you didn't achieve what you wanted to for one reason or another. If you start getting efficacy into the process, you suddenly find that you can do what you really want to do. And that is these interventions that really bring the whole class up, or concentrating on those kids who have just maybe fallen behind a little bit and so on. And this is the thing that's often missed out in a lot of the data or studies I've looked at. It's not just you do things faster, it's you do things better. These people are missing this out because they assume that anything to do with creativity or fancy solutions and so on are fundamentally human and that will never change. They've got to think again because the data already shows that that's just not true. We have to get out of this notion of human exceptionalism, which we had, before Copernicus. We thought the Earth was the center of the solar system. Well, we're just a rock going around the sun. Along comes Darwin, a few centuries later. No, you're not. You're really just like your dog, just got a bigger brain, which is an animal like any other. And now we're in this rather interesting phase where we're actually getting proof that we're not as smart as we think we are, and that this little brain in there has created this technology that's better is now better than itself. It's an astonishing moment in our evolution. I think this is why this is much bigger for me than just teaching. Now, if you take that seriously, you then start to question, as Ben had there, some reflections. You then start to reflect on what can't it do? And in teaching, there's loads of things it can do. So it's a bit like a jigsaw. Let's get rid of all the things we don't like doing or are mechanical and repetitive, like marking. So we focus on quality, social, cultural things that are really tough nuts for AI to crack. But, at the end of the day, you're going, what can't be cracked here in the long game? I think that's what you were hinting at when you this epiphany that we're all having. My goodness, this is heading in a very interesting direction now because it's so. The very fact that it speaks hundreds of languages, it can teach any language, any subject, sensitive to any individual, teach at any level, full accessibility issues. You go, wow, that's slightly astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah, it very much is, and it makes us ask lots of questions, right? So, and this is good, and I love the fact that increasingly, I always thought, well, I'm an RE and philosophy teacher. That's what I taught. So I was like, this is who's going to listen to a RE teacher? And then I think to myself, I've gone from teaching philosophy and thinking to teaching technology and edtech, and then I'm actually going back all the way back into that fundamental questions about existence, fundamental questions about what is true, how do we know what we know, epistemology, all the stuff that's like
correct,
my bread and butter that I love. We're back at that conversation again, which is good, but also disconcerting for a lot of people. And I get it, because we would just prefer, if we're most of us, if we're truly honest, we just prefer let's just keep it simple. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. And but we can't any longer. And interestingly, some of that is based on some of the top level stuff that's happening and the stuff we're seeing. And I know that whatever episode number this is, 249 or something similar, 248, like the conversation is that from 40 odd episodes ago when we had you on, what was new and innovative, what will be 40, 50 episodes now, we'll be looking back and going, that was just. But what are you seeing? I know one thing that's really stuck out of me, which I know that I'd love you to explain, which is showrunner, and in that space. But what else are you seeing that you think might excite people and get them, or maybe not even excite them?
Well, you mentioned something interesting here on the philosophy thing, which is my background. Almost all these books behind me are philosophy books, but an interesting thing is the way in which it's making people. A lot of the debate is almost philosophical, 101 type philosophy, like pub philosophy. A lot of the discussions around ethics, you shake your head if you go, well, because people don't really know what ethics is, and of course it's. By and large, ethics for most people is I'll find something bad about this and have a go. Ethics is actually a very sophisticated. We've had 2,500 years in Western philosophy, like some of the greatest minds ever have discussed and written about it. Oh, let's ignore all that, because most people have this very deontological, like, things are good or bad. I know what's good, and I'm going to tell you this is bad. And so, of course, it's a much subtler thing there, because most of it, of course, as Hume showed, a lot of people's moral outrage is just driven by emotion and sentiment, and it's not fully thought through at all. It's actually really tricky, these subjects, and complex. Nevertheless, that's why I go back to, that little speech I gave about human exceptionalism and the bizarre nature of human exceptionalism. Most philosophy is pointing towards, human exceptionalism is a bit odd, isn't it? We've started to crack that nut. And yet people hold on to it dearly. They're pearl clutching, oh, you're not going to take my creativity away or my critical thinking. All these words that begin with C, by the way, bizarrely alliterative. It's like statistics, 10% lecturing, 20%, 30%. You go, did you do any maths? This is clearly, Dale's code thing is clearly bullshit. But teachers buy it, and I see it all over the place at educational conferences. You go, like, did you progress beyond like 11-year-olds level of maths? Because that's clearly just not true. But it's also true of ethics. But to be fair, on the positive side, it's made people raise their game really, and think a little bit, as you hinted at, Ben, there, think philosophically about the existential threat which this thing is in terms of their professions and so on. Now, what have I seen happening? Well, going back to something I mentioned earlier, I've been really following the stats in actual usage and how it's being used, because that gives you a hint of some of the, I think, amazing things that are happening. It's quite clear now, not only from individual comparative studies, you take a randomized split of a group, you give half of them GPT and the other half not, you give them the same task. Invariably, the side with GPT just does things much faster, but interestingly at better quality and output. And that differential is just rising and rising. So the hit on productivity should be a welcoming thing for us. You've got to be very careful about this because of the potential unemployment issues, which is a political issue, which is close to my heart. But I think we're seeing rises in productivity, rise in efficacy, a rise in its functionality in terms of creative tasks it can do, ideation, all those sort of things that we thought we were really good at. It actually happens to do very well as well. And then what's coming in now, of course, is the reasoning, the other add-on. So you have these large language models that illuminate this world with this big core of capabilities. It's a bit like Wittgenstein's language games. I've started reading a lot of philosophy again. Wittgenstein said, no, language isn't simple here. We're playing a podcast game here. Wittgenstein would say, well, this is a sort of formal dialogue in a structured context for a certain audience. When you're lecturing, that's a completely different thing. Or if you're sitting in the pub having a laugh, it's a completely different thing. And I think one of the things that really surprised me about large language models is I went back to Wittgenstein again because they're actually very good at language games. You can prompt it to be anything, and it becomes that. And you can have that sort of language game with the large language model. I think there's much more to these large language models than people are realizing. Anyway, that's another issue. If we go on to what's happening here, productivity increasing. So the real project, I like to get evidence from real things that are happening in the real world, empirical evidence. I'm really an empiricist at heart. David Hume's my hero. And they're already, the stuff I've been involved in, of course, that's just a small sample of it generally, but the projects I've been involved in it just takes your breath away sometimes what this thing can do, and I've been involved in technology projects all my adult life for 40 solid years. That's almost done nothing else. But these projects are so astounding that they almost take your breath away. And we had Sani, the girl who was heading the project, she'll be in her late 20s, I think. She gave a presentation recently with a project we just finished. And she kept saying, then holy shit, then I had nothing to do. It had just done what I had previously taken weeks and months to do, like in seconds. And this is the sort of revelations that people are having around productivity. Another observation, however, I think it's seeping, go back to the water analogy. I think it's a good metaphor for this real analogy, which is it's seeping into organizations from the bottom up. Actually, I like it when top down gets involved in, like a senior leadership team in a school or whatever, because you have to do that to do it properly, I think. But if you get bottom down and top up, most of this is bottom up. Most of this is driven by learners in education who are using it, or workers or employees, and not the organization itself. What's happening in the workplace learning, for example, all the L&D thing, they're just going around L&D. L&D and HR now have got this sort of roll your eyes a little bit, It's not L&D, it's not another course, is it, on something like resilience that I never asked for, I can't see any use for. And so it's almost like a motorway here where AI is in the fast lane overtaking these institutional things. Now, a lot of very good theorists talked about this. A lot of Marxists talked about this, from Gramsci onwards, really saying that education has become institutionalized in the service of the state. I don't think that's a bad thing if it's in a democracy. I think actually parents are quite socially conservative, and that I think that loop works reasonably well. I wouldn't want to get rid of it, having travelled a lot in the Soviet Union and seen the net result of that. But I think we're also seeing the downsides of that, though. The political interference that myself and Bob spent ages with politicians, trying to get things done in further education. What did they do in the end? Actually, they just recommended policies for their kids. Well, it was okay for me. I'm going to apply this rule to everybody. You will all. Latin will be a modern language in the EBAC. Latin? Really? Are you kidding me? Honestly. And one of the criticisms I've got of the teaching profession is, don't come to me saying that you have the answers if you're still teaching Latin in schools. I honestly, anybody crosses that line for me, I go, no. Well, give me your arguments for teaching Latin. I don't think there's a single solid argument for teaching Latin. We teach Latin because we have Latin teachers, and we're trying to mimic the public school system and attract middle class parents. And so I think we've got to be honest about what we've also contributed, through the teaching profession to fossilizing this system. And I would like to move beyond that, because we just packed. And also, I'm a bit suspicious of people saying, well, let's send all teachers on a training course in AI. You send them in the training course, and it's out of date anyway by the time because you're going to take a while, it's teaching, so we'll take a while to design the course. By the time you've delivered it on an inset day, it's like completely and utterly out of date. And we're still doing some prompting or something that is no longer relevant. So I think we've got to be very careful of cramming the curriculum with these things. And do we have the people who can teach this? Do teachers know enough about AI to teach it to their kids? I'm not too sure they do. Do we have enough people to teach the teachers even on AI? I don't meet many people who really, really fully understand what this is. In fact, I see a lot of evidence that people just don't know what a large language model is and can't cope with it. And actually, you can learn this stuff really easily by going online, and it would take you about half an hour, really, because there's people like Dan, yourselves. There's loads of people out there who really help you if you're a teacher and you really want to know this stuff. You can find it out really, really super quick. And of course, teachers are under pressure, so they don't have time, but that's fine. But the inset day thing, really? We know what that's about. Some consultant coming in, and that's what's perpetuated learning styles and every crap theory going, because we've had those crappy days where we bring in consultants with a little, every consultant needs a PowerPoint with 5 points and a little triangle and a 4-way grid and whatever model they're fanatical about. And most teachers, they go into the classroom, Abraham Maslow's pyramid, does it help you when you're in a classroom and things are kicking off? Not really. So I think if we as a profession got rid of a lot of that stuff and started to get a bit more fleet of foot, it would be a very good thing. But going back to your question there, Ben, I've seen this rising water come in, mainly through learners. So if you look at the stats, these kids are using it. They're often not telling people they're using it, of course. And we've just got to cope with that, because it's going to be part of their lives anyway when they get into the workplace. To ignore this would be just an act of suicidal lunacy, really, because it already is in every workplace, being used by 70% of people in the workplace. Be very careful with that 70%, because people focus on knowledge workers. And so when you're involved in the learning and development people, they often think that everybody works in an office. And you go like, have you ever walked out into the street? Have you ever worked in a working class area? Most of the parents are not in offices, sitting at home on Zoom all day, with a cup of coffee. They're actually collecting your rubbish and keeping the water flowing, and they're like doing hard physical jobs, driving buses and lorries and so on. And those are not the people who are using AI every 5 minutes, So we've got to be very careful with this knowledge worker versus real working class people, that often comes out in the debate. But there's an interesting point, isn't it? Who is it going to hit first? Actually, white-collar workers. This was a big surprise, because most white-collar managerial people, middle-class people, didn't care that much. Actually, the business schools in America were quite happy to outsource all manufacturing to China and wonder why they've got Trump. But it was the same here. I grew up in a mining community in Scotland, and my wife's father was a miner. Boom, sacked, never worked again. And but there wasn't the outrage. It wasn't a big moral existential issue that it was seen as progress by a lot of people. I remember, political commentators. So we have been very cavalier with people in the past when technologies come in. It's not, and that wasn't a technology issue. That was actually a sort of market ideology issue. And that's where we've got to be careful here. But when it hits white-collar people, suddenly it's a big ethical issue. It's a philosophical ethical issue, you know? And that's what I see behind a lot of the ethical discussions around AI is actually, oh my goodness, it's hitting me and my children all of a sudden. That's under threat. I didn't really care when it was wiping out manufacturing in the north of England, you know? Didn't really care that much about it down here where I live. But now it's hitting them. So I think we're facing, one of the things I've noticed here is the degree to which fear. To be honest, I'm not attacking them, because if I'm one of those people now, my kids are those people, and the fear is real. And we have to think about political solutions to this and think about it in terms of economic issues, like you did, Steve, in terms of the mismatches between supply and demand. And what do you do when those people suddenly, we need less of them? And I saw an amazing example recently, which is, I give this example to talks to people now, and I realise it's the wrong audience. I say, you know, when you go into McDonald's, and I look at the audience and go, these people don't go to McDonald's, you know. But most ordinary people do occasionally in their life go to McDonald's. And you voice that, you ask for your meal, you know, when you're going through the drive thing, and it's a real person on the other end. Well, McDonald's have now automated that voice to be a chat GPT type thing. So it just recognises what you're saying, gets the order right. Okay, you drive around. Now, if they automate all of those jobs, that's 500,000 jobs. 500,000 jobs. They've also got a store, McDonald's store in the US, where the whole McDonald's outlet is completely automated. Everything, the burgers, everything. And it's just a sort of IT managed thing with robots and so on. That's 1.x million, another 1.x million jobs go. Now, these are the hits that we may end up taking. And so it may also be the case that many of the, like lawyers and so on, many of these middle sort of white collar professional jobs are under threat as well. Boy, they'll defend that to the death. They'll die on the hill, but because they have access to Parliament, the media, and so on to defend themselves. You know, working class people have never had a voice except for that little vote, which is why people are constantly surprised that elections don't go the way they thought. I wonder why elections are not going the way, because you don't know any of those people. You don't know how they think or what they do. In fact, you tend to be abusing them and then wonder why they don't vote for you. So I think we're living in a fascinating age. This month, have a look at the results in the EU elections. I spent a lot of time in the Netherlands, and I was convinced Wilders was going to win. Did he win? Damn right he won. 1 in 4 in the Netherlands. And we held that up as the great liberal progressive country in Europe. 1 in 4 people voted for somebody who's way, way beyond the right in England. Way, way. He wants to demolish mosques and literally get rid of every Islamic person in the Netherlands. Nobody's saying that ever in England, you know. And then we have the French election coming up. Le Pen is fully ahead in the elections. And in this one, what a surprise, Reformer coming up. It doesn't surprise me in the least. None of this surprises me, because we're not paying attention to the sort of grievances working people have. And I think this is, for me, a lot of this is tied up with many of the things I've fought for all my life. And we don't solve the inequality problems using technology, because that's the only solution to this, really, by and large. Because every country's seeing this, even the rich ones, Sweden, the Netherlands, France, ourselves. We're all wealthy countries, but we're not solving the problem politically, no matter which party is in. Remember, the Labour Party destroyed vocational learning. Blair was the first. Underfunded, defunded it. Both parties did. So I think we've got a chance, going right back to the beginning of this podcast on assessment, I think we have a chance of rebalancing the system. The Labour Party manifesto is quite good in this, actually, about bringing together further education and higher education and seeing it as a single problem to be solved in the world. That makes sense to me. I think when it gets implemented, because almost all those Labour politicians are now graduates and their kids are going to be graduates, so I think it will get skewed back again towards that world. But I think the technology has a chance. Going back to my Marshall Plan thing, I think we have a real opportunity here, if we can grasp it, of using this thing as a commons to really take us back to something that really is not utopian in the way that communism was and fascism was, of course. Not utopian, but very practical. You know, very practical in terms of evening things out and giving people opportunities they didn't have before. Because we can assess real skills, vocational skills. It's not a bad thing to go and be a fitter or a plumber or whatever. It's an admirable thing. You know, I think once we get teaching and learning, paying less attention to text, more to the sort of things that we need in the world. Education isn't all about skills, of course, but it's about life and a living. We can manage two thoughts in our head at the same time. It needn't be this obsessive, I'm going to teach you Latin because that will give you the critical thinking skills that will help you when you're a plumber. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. And we've got a bit into the trap of teaching maths in that way. Maths is a skill. If only you're really good at maths, you'll be a really good plumber. Actually, no. The last person on earth I would call on if something went wrong with plumbing would be a professor of mathematics. So the mythology in schools is that some of these things are abstract skills. When they're not, you need domain knowledge. A lot of teachers know that instinctively. When you're really teaching in a classroom, you're teaching. Well, let's do creativity. How am I going to teach this? I have no idea. You default back to a domain, whether it's drawing, thinking, whatever. So yeah.
Just on that one. No, it's okay. It's okay. We since the new season of the podcast this year, we've done 3 quickfire questions at the end.
All right.
We've iterated those, and you are the second person to get these. These are quickfire, so get ready.
Okay.
Future of workforce skills, crystal ball time.
Okay.
In 5 words, what is the single most important skill students will need to thrive in a future workforce?
Well, it's not a skill because skills are various. So it's not more than 5 words. I would say autonomy is the primary goal of education.
Cool. So, revolution of education, evolution, revolution, whatever we call it. Imagine a completely transformed education system. What do you think the surprising element will be, and why it excites you?
The pendulum swing of agency towards the learner.
Love it.
Okay. For you, what will be the biggest challenge for education in the next 10 to 20 years, and how can we address them?
The political ramifications. Well, I have to do more than 5 words on this.
Yeah.
The political ramifications of having a system that produces a graduate class that looks down on the other half of society has been a disaster. And that it needs rectifying now, not later, but now. Because we're seeing the political turmoil that this is creating in almost every, and these are rich countries across Europe, the US, declining enrollment in universities for 13 years in a row, a real skepticism, a crisis of relevance, a crisis of costs. If we don't change that model, then we'll be walking blind into a world that Peter Turchin has described as, a surplus of graduates that look down on the rest. And I see that conflict. I see that every day now amongst my friend, my kids' friends and so on. And I never thought I'd see it in my lifetime because I come from that world that they're looking down upon. And that's why, for me, this is highly political.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that sums this whole episode up, really, that the AI has to make a difference to those people who have got the least access to it. So we've got a responsibility that way. Don, it's always a pleasure. We follow you from afar, and we've got to speak to you twice now, and we're very, very grateful for your insights. You are definitely pushing the envelope, and not just about here's the new next technology. It's something that's really going to make a difference, and needs to make a difference to the least and the lost and the last and whoever else that is. So Don, thank you for joining us again on another episode of the Edufuturists podcast.
Thank you both. That was a pleasure.